they loaded us on Liberty ships, and we crossed the English Channel just as they did on D-Day on Liberty ships. They had us with as much gear on as they did during D-Day, with the exception we didn't have Mae West vests on. And so we climbed over the side of the Liberty ship on cargo nets onto landing craft infantry. And of course the thing is, you had to be careful that if you lost your grip and fell, and didn't fall into the landing craft, but fell in between the landing craft and the ship, you're just dead. And you had to be careful getting on the landing craft, because the landing craft was next to the Liberty ship, and you had to jump from the cargo net into the landing craft, and you had to plan it, because if the landing craft was going up and down and went down the lowest part and you jumped the longest distance too much, you'd break your leg.
So what did the beach look like at this point?
No bodies, but the big steel crosses that Rommel and von Rentz had put there were still there. The equipment all over. They had a road bulldozed up the top. You didn't have to climb it. We walked up a big curving hill, and I suppose that's probably one of the most traumatic things in my memory, as an infantry replacement, coming up there and getting up to the top of the hill at Omaha. And there were probably, and this is just a guess, because I think it got as high as 25. I would say anywhere from 17 to 20,000 wooden crosses. So the first inclination saying, is this my destiny? And do I turn around and show my fear and my cowardice by running back down to the ship and say, this is not for me? A 40 and 8 is a French boxcar. You got to realize that we brought some trains over, but you got to realize that the European railroad tracks were different than in the United States. And 40 and 8 came out of the First World War. That is 8 horses or 40 men. And they just bunched you in there to take you up to the front, you see. And it wasn't just fast, it was slow, and they'd taken it up, and then they found out, they got reports from different divisions, what their, if one division just had a bad battle and lost 300 or 400 men, why, that's where we were assigned. So we were assigned to the 5th Division outside of Metz, France. And the first night, we were, after we were assigned, we're advancing and got caught in a artillery barrage. And I guess the good thing about the weather was the fact that the ground was soft, and some of the shells that did come through the trees buried, and we just got the flashes. And I can remember, this might have been my second, third, or fourth night in combat. I remember being blown over and on my hands and knees crawling around in the dark, in the mud, trying to find my rifle, my M1. Lost it. And if you lose your rifle, you're useless. I finally found it, and I thought that, and then of course the first night we joined one of our friends, White Crane, who was a close buddy of ours. You polarized to 3 or 4, and he was a replacement. And the thing about replacements is the fact that it took a while to realize that you weren't really welcome, because you were so green, you're always going to make some mistakes. And many times they didn't know who you were for a few days. And somebody said, any of you fellows know that guy called White Crane that joined us yesterday? He said, artillery shell, he took a direct hit in his foxhole.
And so that was your first combat experience?
Yes, it was. We took Metz, and it was a classic dichotomy, because we were in foxholes where normally you teamed up. There was 2 of you in a foxhole, and The weather was so bad and so rainy that you had to dig the end of the foxhole extra deep, and you sat there with your canteen cup and bailed out the water so your buddy wouldn't be laying in water. So once we took Metz and secured Metz, the nice thing about it, when you're in the infantry, you're the first there. There's no quartermaster, there's no brass, anything like that. And when you take a town for the first 2 or 3 days, it's yours. Well, here is this great, Europe's most fortified city, and it was ours. So I went from a muddy, dirty, stinking foxhole to my choice of whatever I wanted, and I picked out a nice, posh apartment house and had a nice bedroom with a beautiful bed. And as I recall, I didn't even bother to take my muddy boots off. I just jumped in bed that way and exhausted, and so it was just an interesting change. We ended up having Thanksgiving in Metz. When it was discovered about Hitler making this major breakthrough through the Ardennes, I guess Eisenhower talked to Patton and said, "How quick can you get your division over there," which is the 5th Infantry Division. They put us on 6x6 trucks, and we rode those for, I don't know, a couple of days, and got there, and that was probably one of the worst parts of the war that I was in, was the Battle of the Bulge. It was a situation where the winter was the worst that the Ardennes had experienced in some 30 or 40 years. Nights would get down to 20 to 40 below. To dig a foxhole, and I've explained to you the size of a foxhole, you had an entrenching tool, which is a little shovel, and with a little screw handle here, and you loosen it up, and you could turn the shovel sideways like that and tighten up, make yourself a little pick. It would take you from 4 to 5 hours to dig a foxhole. Then the irony of it is the fact that once you got the foxhole dug, depending on when you started, you could dig all night, get the foxhole dug, put your roof on it to make sure that you see. If you didn't put the roof on it, screaming Mimis, or Nibblewalfers they call them, technical, and mortars and artillery shells would come in, and it'd have tree burst, and the tree would ignite the shell, and this hot metal, jagged metal, would come down on you like rain. Or if it hit a tree and split the tree, then pieces of wood like arrows would come down also. It could kill you. And that's why you had to have a roof on your foxhole. So your foxhole was 3/4 covered. So the only thing when you dove in, you didn't sleep in there. You didn't sleep with your head near the opening. The opposite. So actually from your knees down was exposed to shrapnel. And the weather conditions got so bad that you got to realize this here, that the weather contributed to casualties equal to that of the Germans. Weather was a big factor. The point is, we dressed. How maybe you want to say, how did you cope with 20 to 40 below? How do we dress? I had two. We had what we call long johns, under that would go all the way down your ankles. I had a pair of those on. I had OD pants. I had fatigue pants. I had 2 OD tops, they're like big heavy sweatshirts. I had an OD shirt. I had an OD olive drab sweater. We found a warehouse that had 40,000 German rabbit skin vests in it, so I had a German rabbit skin vest. I had a field jacket and an overcoat. All this was ideal to keep us from freezing as long as we didn't move, but if you moved, you sweat. So all of a sudden, all your clothes that you had, underclothes, became wet with sweat. if you'd like to know, somebody asked me, how often did you take a shower? And at the time, all I could answer was not too often. And then I thought about it and realized that during the Battle of the Bulge, I went someplace in the neighborhood of 100 to 120 days in the same clothes. And I had probably the worst case of tinea cumaris you could ever believe.
And can you explain that? What is that?
And a tinea cumaris is the technical name for jock itch.
Okay.
And I usually apologize for saying that, but that's the truth. You had no control over your teeth chattering. They just did. They just did. And the biggest concern we were having is the fact we tried to keep our feet dry, and they were wet all the time. And if you weren't careful, you would get trench foot and your feet would turn black. And some fellows were more careless than others. And finally, when their feet hurt so much, they went back. The only answer was amputation. So that was our biggest problem, just plain dirty. If you got the slightest wound, the probability of you dying was very high. You were so fatigued and so tired that you prayed to sleep, and yet you were concerned if you went to sleep, would you wake up at 40 below? And as you may or not know, Patton was frustrated because he couldn't get his air corps assigned to him in the air to help stop this Germans advancing. And so Patton had his famous prayer. In fact, he had a little one about this size on a business card side they gave all of us. Then he had a 174-word prayer. And being Patton, he gave it in Luxembourg. And Patton, with his ego, said in his prayer, starting off, "Sir," this is Patton talking. And of course, this is Patton's approach to God, calling him sir, you know. And he said that all I want is 4 days of good weather so I can relieve and give support to my young men and get my Air Corps into the air. Well, Christmas Eve, I spent most of the night digging a foxhole. And when the sun came up, believe it or not, the sun came up, and it was a beautiful, clear day, and we, after spending all night digging a foxhole, decided to move us out. So they moved us out on the side of a hill in the open. Christmas morning in 1944, in the Battle of the Bulge, was the most beautiful morning you had ever seen. Clear, wonderful, and because it was Christmas, I just knew, and everybody just knew also, that the Germans would honor this day, and it would be a quiet day. So we were assigned a place to dig out, and I scraped away about, 3 feet of snow, 4 feet of snow, and then started chipping. Well, I was chipping away, and I had a hole that would hold the contents of my steel helmet, and that's not very big. And all of a sudden we heard Screaming Mimi, roaring. And we knew they were coming, so the logical thing you do, almost conditioned reflex, was to jump in your foxhole. Well, my foxhole then had reached the point where it protected my whole face. So I stuck my face in there, and my bottom stuck up like an ostrich sticking out of his head, sticking out of a hole. And they falling all around us for about 10 or 15 minutes. And with one fell within, from here to where you're sitting, or to the corner there, and it was so close that you could hear it sizzling in the snow, and it turned out to be a dud. Well, the irony is for the last 65 years, I have been saying a prayer to that slave who worked in that German munition plant that decided that that particular shell would be a dud. If it wasn't, I wouldn't be here. And that was the best Christmas present I've got in my whole existence, and that I never actually opened up. The sequel to that was the fact that that incentive from that dud, landing so close and not exploding, turned me into a hydraulic digging machine, and you would be surprised how quick I dug that foxhole on that particular day. And that's one of the many days that I should have been dead and wasn't dead. And Providence, like my childhood, is the fact that God must have some reason for keeping me around and even being here today talking to people about what took place. So that was my Christmas present on 1944. February, then we moved on into Germany. We moved into, we crossed the Saar River, the Prune River. When I crossed the Prune River on February the 12th, why, this was at night, and we captured some Germans, and then we took this house in Holzenberg, which is on top of a mountain. This happened to be a headquarters of a German group. We put the prisoners in the basement, and every GI had one of three orientations. My orientation was, I was always the eating champion of all our family reunions. I love to eat. Some of our fellows were oriented for, they liked drinking. And then other ones were more predominantly, although we were all teenagers, were oriented towards women. So when we took captured a city or a town after we secured it, I didn't have enough K rations because they always give us extra K ration. I ate them all before we crossed the river crossing, made a river crossing, because I want to make sure that I had a full stomach if I was going to die. So we took the chateau, and after we secured it and put the German prisoners in the basement, I went looking, and I went out in the kitchen. Excuse me. And this was a large wooden stove, and it had a big hood from the ceiling, and you looked up there, and there were two poles, and hanging from those poles were hams. Well, this is 3:30 in the morning. We'd secured the place, and I put a mental note, and I thought, well, I'm too tired to worry about cutting down those hams. So I went back in the front room, and we had guards, and collapsed, was tired, and sat next to the stove was Belinda and Dick Weiss, Malcolm Belinda. He was a replacement, 27, 28, married, two little girls. And he didn't say a word about it. He just did whatever he had to do, and he was our bazooka man. And he collapsed next to the stove and went to sleep, and I got next to him and went to sleep, and then Dick got next to me and went to sleep next to the stove. And of course, I was dreaming of ham for breakfast because I'd found them and didn't want to do anything about it. And during the night, Dick got hot and moved up to the front corner of the room. And about 9:30, 9:45, I woke up and had visions of ham for breakfast and went out in the kitchen, climbed on top of the stove, and was cutting down one of the hams. And at 10 o'clock, a German Tiger tank pulled someplace in the woods in front of it, put 288s right through the front window. Blew up the wall where Belinda was, blew up the stove, and then put a second one through the back window. And they, I don't know, 4 or 5 guys were killed. Those that weren't killed were screaming, and I dragged them in the back kitchen because I was on top of the stove, and these old houses had big, thick walls and were built like fortresses. And then the Lieutenant Williams, who was in a chateau behind, came running across the field, and a sniper hit him twice in the leg, and he was laying out in the field, and I hollered to Dick, "Dick, cover me, I'm going to go get the lieutenant." And of course, Dick, had moved from where I was sitting, moved to the front of the room. All he got was the explosion. And he was deaf for 3 or 4 days. So he can remember me shouting at him, but didn't know what I was saying. So I jumped out and dragged the lieutenant in. We had a head count, and somebody says, "Where's Belinda?" I said, "He was right next to me, next to the wooden stove." Well, we went pulling all the debris, and we found Belinda. His left arm was gone. It just held on my little skin, still bleeding. I grabbed that, and he had almost been cut in half here. And the medic, it was turning yellow, and the medic looked at me and said, "Well, nothing to do." So, and I looked at him and said, "Well, okay." So he tore open some sulfur powder and sprinkled it on Belinda. More of a ceremony than actually having to do anything good. And of course he died. And that was a case of, over the years, I said how my eating habits saved my life, because I should have been dead if I stayed there and slept and not been out in the back on top of the stove cutting down a ham. And it was just a bad day. And then the story goes on in the same house. The whole front blown out. First thing you know, there's another explosion from our back, where we came up through the woods. So we had all visions of being surrounded, and somebody looked out and seen it was GIs, and they shot a bazooka in, and then they said, "What are we going to do there?" So we got a white flag and waved it up, and they came up and they thought they were capturing Germans, and they were 1,000 yards off of their sector map. All new outfit, because of the fact that they had all their ranks, and all the non-coms had great big 3 stripes and a sergeant or staff sergeant or tech sergeant painted right here. Greenhorns. They didn't know any better. "What are you doing here? How come you're not doing something?" I said, "Well, the Germans are all dug across this big field over here." "Oh, is that right?" I said, "Yeah, they're dug in, and we're pinned down. Or we'll take care of it." Well, it was like being at a movie. The whole front of the house blown out, and all these new Greenhorns, 1,000 yards off their sector map. So they charged across the field, and the Germans probably dropped 20 of them right in front of us. Eventually, they overrode them, but 20 of our Greenhorn GI buddies were left in the field that day. So that was just another day. Probably the next big incident was the fact, and there's a story, and this is crossing the Rhine. This is very significant. We crossed the Rhine at Oppenheim on March the 22nd. And the Rhine at that point was 800 feet across. It was about 10 feet to 12 feet deep, and it was moving at the rate of maybe a couple miles an hour. And we had made something like 17 river crossings for Patton. And Patton used us and wanted us to get across the Rhine River as quick as possible, because Patton had heard, and rightfully so through Associated Press, that Churchill was ready to make an announcement that Montgomery, the British general, was the first to cross the Rhine in the history of, first in history. And Patton, with his ego, wasn't going to let that happen. So he got us up there, and he put us across an 8-man flat-bottom rowboats. And that day was another significant day for me because I was assistant squad leader. That's just 3 stripes up. And on our side of the Rhine, it was a beautiful, beautiful March day. On the other side of the Rhine were orchards, and the whatever they were, they could have been cherry trees or whatever, but they were in blossom. And we got across, and our side of the Rhine was quiet, and the other side, the Germans, was flat. We just had all kinds of artillery shells hitting. So we got across, and our squad leader, we call him Smokey. He was from Ohio. And why would you call your sergeant Smokey? He was a chain smoker, and in the morning he would light his first cigarette with his Zippo, and until he went to sleep, would never take his Zippo out. He always used the short stub to light the new one. And his hands were brown from nicotine, and his teeth were brown from smoking, and we called him Smokey. And he'd been around a long time. He got wounded, so it automatically made me become the squad leader. And because this is an orchard area that was an orchard area that had been irrigated, they had dug little ditches for the water to irrigate the trees, and they had little like piles of dirt, like we call them dikes. So as we advanced to clear out this point, as we got across the Rhine, why every time we went over the dike, a sniper would shoot at you. And don't let everybody tell you that you don't know a sniper's shooting at you, because of the velocity of the little bullet and the turbulence behind that. If you hear it, of course you're not dead, but you can hear it. You can hear a sniper and go, psst. Well, every time we went over, somebody shot. My friend Dick Weiss, who has since passed away, who was my co-author, he was hit in the shoulder. And then I got across and heard it, so he missed me. I should have been dead. I got by my ear. Then I said, we need more firepower. Where's Goldie? He was our Browning automatic BAR man, which is automatic. The M1 is semi-automatic. So I said, where's Goldie? And then the next guy got over, and he said, well, Goldie's not coming. The sniper got him right in the neck. And I don't normally say this, but I grew up in a time when if I came home crying because I'd fallen or scratched my legs or something, my father would always say, big boys don't cry. Well, that day, after that, I guess I cried a little because it was in March, and we heard rumors, and we'd broken into Germany. We knew that maybe the war was coming to an end. And then to have him, he was from Sulphur Spring, Texas, about 6'2", blonde. Women just go wild over him. He was just a very, very handsome Texan. And to think that Goldie had gone that far and the sniper had killed him. So I cried a little that day. Most of the time I didn't, but I did that day. And then that was a day quite significant. Patton, knowing that he had beat the British crossing the Rhine, called up Bradley, and Bradley told General Bradley, that I'm across. And Bradley turned out to be very happy that he was across, and made an announcement 2 hours before Churchill on his press release that the Americans were the first to cross. And of course, Montgomery didn't like that. And then to add insult to injury, Patton being Patton, and he had done it once before in Italy, decided to make a grand gesture, and he was the second vehicle to cross the pontoon bridge that they finally got done after we secured the other side, and had an Associated Press photographer with him in his Jeep. And halfway across, Patton, who at that time I believe was a 3-star, told the driver to stop and get out, and told the Associated Press photographer to get his camera ready. And Patton proceeded to urinate in the Rhine and made this, as it says, I heard it said anyway, that this is his statement, Hitler, this is what I think of your GD, Sacred River. And then they proceeded across and then did he was quite a historian, and he grabbed some dirt and threw it in the river, which was symbolic of another gesture of some great general in the past. So that was the significance of that. We went on to liberate Frankfurt on the Main, which is a gigantic city. And then we also helped liberate Worms. And after we took that, Frankfurt on the Main was a giant city, and it was ours for a few days, and the Germans were giving up, and we had a lot of those, and then we ended up in, gradually went into Austria and Czechoslovakia, and of course again we had snipers, and I survived that. And then probably the last thing, that reason I should have been dead, and it's Providence I'm here or even speaking to you, is the fact that the war ended May the 8th, and we were in the vicinity of Winterberg, Czechoslovakia. And we were, my squad and our lieutenant was in a crossroads by a river, and we were in a little grocery store. And it was a country crossroad, and across from our little grocery store that we were billeted in was I don't know what you want to call a German, a Ratskiller, or a pub, or a tavern, or whatever. And the rumors were flying, 4 days before the war ended. It was just, so the guys, we were envious of the fellows in there over there, because they had wine and champagne and beer. But the problem was that on top of a hill down near the river, as we looked out, was a German Tiger tank, and they had the ability to blow us to pieces, because this was just a little old wooden type grocery store. But evidently, fleeing the Russians, they were out of 88s, but they had machine guns. So anytime you ventured out, they would strafe the crossroads with machine gun fire. Well, our guys, were adventurous and stupid and young. Were envious, and of course the tavern was hidden by a bunch of trees. So when you come out the front door, you could stand there, and the Germans on top of the hill couldn't see him. So we would look through our field glasses, and when the guy, a German on the tanker, got up from behind his machine gun to either get a smoke or make a call to Mother Nature, we would give a signal, we'd run across. And then when you were done imbibing, you'd run back. Well, being a sergeant, I let my guys do that, and it was my turn. So when they looked and it was clear, and I raced across. Well, by then, the Germans were getting pretty smart, and they got frustrated. So I came out of the pub and waved and said, "I'm ready to come back." And they said, "Okay, just a minute." And they looked, and he had jumped away from his machine gun. So I started to run. Well, they said, no, he's wise. Well, what do you do? I was almost in the crossroads. And if I stopped, I knew he'd first get me. So I just, and I tell the story this way, that I guess made believe I was in a Maserati or a Lamborghini and put it in low gear and kept running. A German machine gunner picked me up from behind and and you could hear the dirt behind you as I run. And I told him to hold the front door open, so I run and jump through the front door, and as he fired across the front of the building. And so that was a particular case where 4 days before the war, I did something stupid, or I could have been dead. And then, of course, the irony of the thing is, there's always somebody kidding and saying, "Hey, Jeff, you owe me $50." So I don't know if they were betting if I wasn't going to make it or whatever. And if I have any regrets, that we didn't have an Olympic timer there, because I'd have made Jesse Owens look like a snail. I can tell you, I was moving, and I can still today hear the dirt come up with a machine gun tracking me, and evidently he wasn't moving it fast enough, and he was 1,000 or 1,500 yards away with this machine gun, just tearing up the dirt behind me. And then, of course, that was 4 days before the war ended, and I guess that was just about the end of